think about the importance of ethics in research, in the biomedical research, and we kind of don't think about the kind of work we do as needing the same kind of overview. But I think you'll see that, you know, there are issues of power, there are issues of working with children who may not feel empowered to say no to adults. So there are all kinds of issues that we need to consider in the work that we do. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Sue Nolan, who's on the faculty. She sits currently on one of the IRB, or at this university it's called the Human Subjects Division, HSD. So we'll be using those terms interchangeably probably. So Sue sits currently on one of those committees as a faculty representative, and we'll be sharing some thoughts. Naomi Wilson, who works in the Office of Research Support, will also be adding some detail. And we're also like to thank Adrienne Meyer for coming over. Adrienne is the leader of the team who works with our applications over at the Human Subjects Division. So it's great to have both faculty perspectives from the committee, our staff perspectives from working with a lot of students, and perspectives from the Human Subjects Division itself. So thank you for coming.
Okay, so I put this slide up first because I wanted to emphasize the fact that it is a joint responsibility to protect the people who help us with our research, of the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, and you, and us, as researchers. And so IRB has part of that role, and you have a big part of that role too, because you're the person who's actually going to be on the ground interacting with the people who are participating in your research. And the IRB is not going to be sitting next to you while you interview that kindergartner. And so you have to really familiarize yourself with the ways in which we work ethically with research subjects. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And also we're going to make sure that you know who your resources are for help, because navigating human subjects at University of Washington, like any place else that takes it seriously, can sometimes be confusing. The IRB, or the Human Subjects Division, has done a great job over the last few years of trying to streamline the process and make all the information that you need available easily to you on the web. But it's also really good to have faces to talk to and people to ask questions of if you're not quite sure what things mean. So I still go to Adrienne and ask her questions about things, and I've been on the IRB for a while now. So, okay, so the Belmont report. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what led to the Belmont report. One of the studies that was cited as an egregious violation of the human rights of the participants was the Tuskegee syphilis study. Those of you who are in the, who saw me last year when I talked to the inquiry course for the doctoral students remember that I kind of went on and on about how, yes, this was a really horrible study, but it has all the same issues that we have to work around as, or that we have to think about as researchers as well. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that here, but it and a number of other studies that were also reported by whistleblowers, by people who said this is really not right that we are doing this to people in the name of research, led to a National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And they came up with this thing called the Belmont Report that basically laid out all the issues and led to the development of what's called the Common Rule, which is the federal regulation under which the institutional review boards across the country operate. So there's three basic ethical principles that arise from the Belmont Report: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And I want to go through each of them and to try to think about how this might affect you as a researcher in the College of Education. So respect for persons, the first part of that is that individuals have to be freely able to agree or decline participation in your research. They can't feel pressured or coerced. And sometimes things that we do in really well-meaning ways can turn out to be coercive. For example, you're going to try and get a bunch of fifth graders to participate in your research study, answer your questions. And so their teacher, to help you out, says, and if you participate, you'll get extra credit points for this. Or I will give you a special ticket and you can go to the library on Friday, or something like that. Well, unless that was approved by the IRB as necessary, and it would likely not be, you're already being coercive. So now the teacher, or even if, let's say, you're working with students that are in a bilingual program in one of our school districts, and those students are recent immigrants and they feel a little uncomfortable in the U.S. education setting. They're not really familiar with what's expected of them necessarily, and their teacher, for whom they have a lot of respect, says, here is this person from the University of Washington, and she wants to do research with you, and she wants you to all participate in this research, so I hope that you all will. That in itself can be felt as coercion by giving the subject. They may not feel like they can really say no because, gee, their teacher asked them to do it, and maybe this is expected here, and I don't really know that. And so the kinds of work that we do in the College of Education have to think about these things as well. So individuals have to be autonomous agents. They have to be able to both agree or disagree to participate initially and feel comfortable saying, you know, I changed my mind. And that's an even harder thing for people to do, especially if you're talking to people who are younger than you and who may feel like you have more power or authority than they do. So there's additional protection for what they call vulnerable populations, and this includes children under the age of 18. And so if you are doing research where you're going to be working with children, then you will have to fill out some supplementary questions on your IRB application to make sure that you know how to work with children ethically. And I'll be talking about some resources for that in a little bit. The second principle is beneficence, and that means that the subjects themselves, the research participants, should have, if possible, benefit from the research. And a lot of times it's not possible because they don't directly benefit. But if possible, they do. And so that you're not asking them to take on a lot of risks for no benefit. Right? So we shouldn't, in the Tuskegee syphilis study, not only were people not told that they were in a study and not told that they could leave a study, they were asked to take on lots of risks and got no direct benefits for it. So that was a real problem. But this happens also. For example, suppose that you're doing an intervention study and you're going to be working on social emotional skills or reading strategies or math learning approaches with a bunch of kids, and you don't know whether or not the thing that you're doing is going to be helpful to them or not. It's an experiment, right? So you randomly assign them, let's say. Now, to do that, let's say you take them out of, you're doing a math intervention, you take them out of their regular math instruction for a period of several weeks. Now that's a risk. You may not think of it as risky because, gee, you're just working with them on math and isn't math the same, but what if they miss important stuff from their math instruction that you don't give them in the intervention that you're doing? Now you've asked them, you put them at potentially a disadvantage, so that's a risk that you have to be able to think through and mitigate in order to be able to do your research with kids. Justice is the third principle, where you distribute the risks and benefits fairly. And so you'll answer questions on an IRB application that ask you about how you selected your subject population. So who's excluded and who's included in your study? Are you targeting a particular subgroup of the population in order to get a lot of information about them and to find out if things work with them, but also asking them to bear all the risks for that? Or do you have a reason for only looking at these particular kids or these particular teachers or other adults? And can you justify that? And so they'll ask you questions about, if you're doing a study about the impact of an intervention to increase interest in science among adolescent girls, then you're going to restrict your sample population to adolescent girls, obviously. But if you're doing a study to see whether you can teach people anti-bullying strategies, and you pick a particular subgroup of population and you target that group, if you don't have a reason for that, then you're going to get questions from the IRB about, well, are you spreading the risk fairly? Are you targeting particular subgroups? Are you going to the school because you think that the kids are going to be more likely to want to be in your study, but there are also kids who are at disadvantage and shouldn't be taken out of their regular classes, or any of those other kinds of things. So all of these things, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, all are things that are very important to consider even when you're doing educational research. Okay, anytime you're working with human subjects. Okay, so your responsibilities. The University of Washington requires that all regulated research undertaken by faculty, students, or staff that involves human subjects must be reviewed and approved prior to contacting potential subjects, prior to beginning a secondary analysis. So either of those two things. So you can't go talk to the school district, recruit some subjects, and then get approval. Okay, you have to get approval before you start doing research activity. And I'm going to tell you about what those underlying terms mean. Regulated research in human subjects, because they're not as broad as you might think. So what's regulated research? It's a systematic investigation that's designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. If you are interviewing 2 people for your qual methods class, and you're doing it as a class project, that is not regulated research, even though it looks just like research. Because really what it is a class project. And you're going to not try to tell everyone in the world about it and generalize in any way. And it's not particularly systematic. It's the 2 kids that you got that are friends of your kid's sister, right, that are going to be participants in your studies. But it's not regulated research. We want you to behave ethically, but it doesn't have to be reviewed by the IRB. So systematic, designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Now, the generalizable knowledge part gets tricky when we are talking about qualitative research with small samples or single subject research, single subject samples. And so that's not necessarily a black or white thing. So sometimes people say, I'm doing a research study and I'm talking to these 3 people and I'm trying to find out X or Y or Z because I think it will be useful to us in designing teacher education. And the IRB might come back with that doesn't count as regulated research because it's not a systematic study to produce generalizable results that can be generalizably, right? Okay, so and if you're confused now, that's okay. Because it's not always really a clear-cut kind of a thing. And that's why you have an advisor, and that's why you have the people in the research office, and like Naomi, for example, and that's why you have wonderful people like Adrian at the Human Subjects Division who can help you decide that. And in the end, you don't really decide that. You send it in, and they say, no, you don't need to be reviewed, and you go on your merry way. Okay? All right. So, who's a human subject? It's a person about whom you collect private and identifiable data. And or a person from whom you gain information through interaction or intervention. So this actually, you would think that we would all know what human subjects are, but this is actually something that gets discussed a lot from time to time over in the Human Subjects Division and on the IRBs. Well, is this really human subjects research if I'm interviewing random people on the street? Well, yes, because you're interacting with them, but is it identifiable? Right. So human subjects are not dead people, except under certain circumstances. So if you're doing historical research and you're looking at diary data, or you're looking at education test scores or anything like that with people who are no longer living, that does not count most of the time. If you are looking at de-identified data, so sometimes large national data sets are available for people to do research on. If you don't know that now, you will know that at some point down the line. So they make those available, but they take away all the identifiers. So it's now not possible to know who any of those individual subjects are. Research on those kinds of data are not human subjects research. Stop me if I go astray, Adrian. You will. Okay, good. I was worried. I was like, no, that rule changed yesterday. And, so applying the ethical principles in our kind of research, respect for person includes informed consent. It's called assent if it's with children under 18, and then you have to either get a waiver for parental consent for those folks. So you have to obtain and document the consent. There has to be voluntary participation, no coercion, and you have to protect their privacy, especially if the data that you're collecting is sensitive in any way. Beneficence, you want to design your study to have the least possible risk for your participants. For example, if you have a choice between meeting with them after school versus meeting with them during their reading instruction time, you might want to try to pick after school because that might not impact them as much. That might lower the risk. The risks are reasonable in relationship to the benefits of the research. And these don't have to be benefits to the individual participant. They can be benefits because it's so important that we find the answer to this research question, because it's going to have a huge impact on kids in general. That's the kind of, those kinds of benefits counts as well. And you have to maintain confidentiality, again, especially if the things that they talk about are at all sensitive. And that might be something as benign as, do you like math class? If their teacher says, if the teacher finds out that Bobby doesn't like math class, that might actually impact Bobby negatively down the line. So you have to maintain confidentiality, even with questions that you don't think are particularly sensitive. And justice gets played out in terms of your enrollment of participants. We want to try to select participants equitably. Journals in education and psychology are now more likely to raise an eyebrow if you don't have a study that includes a spectrum of the population. So it's not as tight as we might hope it to be. There's still studies that get published that are done in suburban junior high school classrooms with white kids, and then people generalize from those. But in general, there's been an increasing push on the part of journals to try, and people who review for journals, to try to get more equitable distribution of the data that you collect about things you want to generalize about in psychology and in education. So selecting participants equitably, avoiding exploitation of vulnerable populations, we talked about that. And that includes students and children. Sometimes doctoral students will be instructors in a class, and they'll want to try some intervention out or try some new strategy out and collect data from their own students. Sometimes we want to collect. I've done studies where I've collected data from, for example, teacher education students, and I teach in the teacher education program. And so you have to have protections built into your design so that those students are not put at risk because they're in your study. So for example, we did a study of novice teacher candidates while they were still in the program. I did this with a colleague who was the methods instructor at the time, Lonnie Horner. And we recruited students in social studies and in math. And so we made sure that Lonnie never interviewed or observe students that were becoming math teachers, because they had all been her students at one point. And even though we could have said, well, we'll wait until after she has no, grading authority over them, after they're done with math methods class, then she could observe them. But there's still so much social pressure to perform in a particular way for your math methods teacher or whoever else that has had that relationship with you, that we just did that to make sure that those kinds of pressures were not felt by the students. So that's an example. There are ways to do that. You can have, let's say you want to survey the students that you're instructing, you can have somebody else collect the survey data and hold it for you until after the grades have been submitted. And that's okay. If you don't have an ongoing relationship with students, then that's an okay thing. So there's ways to do it. Yes, Neil.
I wanted to say one comment about the maintaining confidentiality too, which is thinking about that in terms of how you're going to be reporting the data that you collect, because sometimes these are small communities, and so even though you think you've collected this information and it's not identifiable, the way that you describe the community that you have now collected data from makes it very identifiable. So an example is that we had a study that came through with principals, and it was 3 schools in Seattle Public School District. We wanted to be able to describe the schools and the community around the schools. And this student researcher, had been through these schools and really wanted to kind of describe the homes, the families, the demographics. And I read through it, and because I have 2 kids in Seattle Public Schools, I knew exactly what 3 schools those were. Just by the descriptors of they were within walking distance with each other, they had a view of the lake, some of these homes, and I was like, no, I know exactly what these schools are. So those principals then didn't have the confidentiality that they had when they gave their consent to go through this study. So think about the kind of full process too, would be my recommendation when you're thinking about confidentiality, not how you're collecting, but also how you're going to be reporting it out, and the descriptors that you're going to put in to describe the data, even if it is de-identified.
Yeah, that's hugely important. Thanks for bringing that up. That's something that we still struggle with when we do. I'm doing a study now where I'm working with a handful of teachers that work in particular kinds of schools, and we have to be careful about what we think we're going to be able to say that describes those schools, because we need to describe the context in which we're doing the research at the same time without pointing fingers at particular individuals. And so it's an ongoing struggle, even if you think these things through, as you analyze your data and as you come to particular conclusions about what you've found, you might end up having things that you realize through doing the research that you didn't anticipate. And so you continually have to be thinking about, okay, how can I report this in a way that gives enough information so that people can understand the impacts of the context that people were in without outing the individual teacher or principal who might have been doing things that some people might not do.
Sure, and some of these schools too are they're like families, and they are very small communities where, especially when it comes to qualitative research, I mean, I guarantee you that, in my kids' school, there could be just a certain sentence that you quote in your research that somebody said in response to an answer that everyone in that school will go, oh, I know who that is. That's Doreen, because, that's...
She always says that.
She always says that, right? And that's just the way that she puts things. And then they've been identified. So even if you're saying subject 1, then all throughout your entire report out, everybody knows who subject 1 is. And
so I have seen articles where the study was done on a small number of individual teachers, where in order to protect the identity of the teachers within their own district, right, if you might read the article, they actually changed the gender.
Right.
And so they said, we have changed gender, name, age, and years of experience, or whatever it was, just to make sure that those things were not clues to who said what. So it gets tricky. Thanks for bringing that up. That's okay, so here are the steps. It's a workshop, right? So here's the steps in an IRB review. You apply. So in an application, you describe your proposed study, including the purpose, participants, procedures, and the data security. You also have to report if it's funded or not, and by whom. And if it's, oftentimes people will do research at some point in their graduate school career where they're using data that their advisor's research team has collected, or a faculty member's research team has collected. And then you need to make sure that you know what the human subjects protocol is for that research, so that you do it following the approved protocol. This is assuming it's been approved. Of course it would have been. And that you get added to the research team if you have access to the data, especially if the data are identifiable. So sometimes you're filling out the application because it's your research, and sometimes someone else has filled out the application, and you need to make sure that you know the protocol and follow it to the letter. Then after the application is submitted, which is going to be online pretty soon, which is really exciting to all of us who have to like carry big things of paper around when we do IRB reviews. Then either the full committee, and in your case it would almost exclusively be committee G. I always want to say C, but that's not one. G, and Adrian is the head staff person for that committee, or HSD staff, depending on the level of review required for the particular study. I'll go into that in a sec. They review the application for adherence to the ethical principles that I just described, set out in the common rule. And then there's a decision, and when the decision is made, it can be approval, it can be deferral, or it can be denial. So approval means you're approved to go forth and follow the rules and be ethical and do your study. Deferral means not yet, we're not happy with certain things, or you haven't given us certain information that we need in order to make a decision, and so we're not going to make a decision yet. We're going to get more information from you, and a lot of times at that point there's an interaction between the human subjects division staff and the researcher to try to clear up the things that are problematic, in addition to the formal correspondence that goes out. Or it can in some cases be denied if the usually this is this usually, would you say usually on a full board?
Only the full board is allowed to deny things, and I'd say it's very rare, and it's usually after many go-rounds.
Many go-rounds.
Find a way to approve the application.
Yeah. So a lot of times it's a matter of either helping the researcher think about ways that they can do what they want to do ethically when it's not, or it's talking to them about whether they really need to do everything that they've asked to do, or maybe they could do part of what they've asked to do and leave the unethical part out. It's rare that it's denied, but we have denied them. I think I've been on the IRB for what, 5 years now, Deb? I went on one. And I think we've denied one or maybe two in the time I've been on it, so it doesn't happen very often. Usually what happens is we go through rounds of, no, really, we asked you to do this and you didn't do it, and so now we're asking you again, please do this, so we don't have to deny it.
We had one denial, and I would, but it was research that was collected for R&I or a class project that did not go through approval, that then was trying to be used for a PhD dissertation, that you cannot go back and get approval for research that has already, data that's already been collected if it's for a class project, so.
I don't know that that's strictly true, but if there was something that wasn't caught in the class level review and that made what was done not fit the criteria, then you can't retrospectively go back and refit it. So it wouldn't be just because it had been done in a class. It would have been because there was something about it that wouldn't have passed IRB review.
Correct.
You want to ask?
There's, so the formal denial process, the full board is only allowed to do that, and that is simply because we have an expedited review process where one person can look at it and say, yeah, this is great, go ahead and do your research. Only the full board can deny things, and that's really because we don't want one person to be able to deny a research project. We want a committee of people to be able to sit around and go, yes, yes, no, yes, this is appropriate, that this would not be allowed to go on. Formal denial is very, very rare. Like Sue said, like maybe one, maybe two at the most, and usually that's almost even more administrative action in order to maybe punt it back to them and say, look, you're going to have to totally redo this thing. Sometimes we ask people to resubmit things on different applications or redo things or please, do something different. That's not necessarily an application being denied, and that sometimes happens. That's really just us asking you to, it's part of the process and asking you to redo something in a different way. And
Yeah, that's the deferral part.
Yeah, it's the deferral part, and it gets at the interaction of let's try and move you along to an approval, which is always ultimately our goal is what can we do to get you up and running and doing research.
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind, and there's lore that gets passed down in places like colleges of education and other colleges that where someone says IRB, right? They're just trying to be overly controlling. They're just trying to. I can attest to the fact that the staff and the members of the committee really want people to be able to do their research. But we take our job seriously in terms of protecting the populations of people, or the groups of people that help us with our research. And so that's where it comes down to. We try very carefully not to overstep our bounds. We try very carefully. I mean, you have a bunch of researchers on these things, right? These committees. And so we'll say, well, if they'd done it this way, it would be so much better. And the chair will say, well, but that's not our job, is it? We don't redesign their research for them. We talk to them about things that are problematic about this research, and then they might come to us and say, what if I did it that way? That's different. No, you're not going to say, well, but if you don't redesign it this other way. So anyway, we try to be sometimes too helpful. But, we are held in check by people who help us respect our boundaries. All right, so 3 types of review. There's exempt research, which is exempt in quotations because it still has to be looked at by somebody over in HSD to tell you, yes, it's exempt. So what that means is there's certain categories, I think I might even actually have them on your handout there, of research. Survey research, especially anonymous survey research, is usually exempt and so forth. And then once they look at it and say, yep, you're good, then you don't have to go back and be re-reviewed at intervals. There's the minimal risk review, which is done by HSD staff. Minimal risk means that it's a risk that's not greater than the participants would encounter in their normal daily life. That's how they make that decision. If it's minimal risk, then it can be, if not federally funded, can be reviewed less frequently, and it can be handled at the staff level. It doesn't have to go to the full committee. And then the full committee review is for everything. Recently, there's been a shift over the last year or two at the Human Subjects Division where because of the ways that minimal risk was being handled, more and more things qualified as minimal risk, and there wasn't really the staff capacity to handle it, and so things got kind of backlogged. Meanwhile, on the full boards, our workload was shrinking, and so over the last 6 months, they have actually decommissioned a couple of the full board committees because our workload shrank, and repurposed staff around the building to increase the number of people working on minimal risk. And so hopefully that will cause minimal risk to be more of the quicker review that it was intended to be when first designed. Okay, so who's on the committee? Researchers like me, human subjects division staff like Adrian, and community members. So we have to have at least one community member who is someone who is not a researcher and not working for HSD. Why do you think that might be? I know, I've been talking at you and now I'm asking you for information. Why do we need a community member on every IRB? Go ahead.
Oh, I would say like a perspective that isn't in research.
Yeah, I mean, you have a bunch of researchers sitting around going, yeah, that'll be all right, yeah, that's okay, you know, and the HSD staff might possibly say, well, yeah, we like researchers to do research, so that would be good. And the community member says, wait a minute, maybe not. So and we have for one group of protected subjects, prisoners, and you might say, oh, well, I'm in a college of education, I don't do research on prisoners, but people do research on prisoners in colleges of education like this one. They go work at the juvenile offenders sites, or they do educational research with adult offenders. So yes, sometimes we do research on prisoner populations, and then we have to have a prisoner advocate who is a voting member of the committee for that kind of application, who then says, who knows the prison system and knows what risks, special risk prisoners run in being involved in research. So there are 5 committees now, and most of the research for the college is reviewed by Adrian's committee. That's not the one I'm on, by the way. I'm on Committee J, so I never get to see your guys' stuff, sorry. It's true. All right, so, and now, Naomi, we'll tell you about doing it here.
Right, nuts and bolts, which are about to change. So I don't know if you guys, I know, have. So this is like, kind of take this all into consideration of the fact that Human Subjects Division is going online submissions, which is called Zipline.
When is that happening?
Well, May 15th is when we are starting rollout. It will be a staged rollout. So it'll take about 6 to 12 months to get everybody up online. We're not quite sure which departments or divisions or which teams will start first, but we're going to officially launch it on May 15th.
Right. So until then, this is the process, and we will, try to revamp our processes once we get into the rollout stage of Zipline. So I have, let's see, we have a handout here, and I won't go over it too much, but this is just some guidelines on R&I projects. One of the things that I was kind of touching on earlier, but reminding students, if you are only doing it just for a classroom project, you may or may not need IRB review, but if you are going to roll something up into a PhD dissertation, it needs to be reviewed. So, some guidelines on there. So, the process here in the college, except for right now, is still paper versions. So, usually we ask that you go through the Human Subjects Division guidelines on determining whether or not your particular research project is going to be exempt, minimal risk, or full. If you have any questions about trying to figure that out, Human Subjects Division has a minimal risk determination checklist that you can go through. I'm happy to help any of you find those forms, find those checklists, try to navigate, but it's all up there on the Human Subjects Division website in terms of in terms of helping you to be able to make that determination. So they have a great checklist that you go through with those. And then you complete the application and the other necessary materials, again, depending on what you're doing. You may need, if you're looking at students, minors under the age of 18, you're going to need a supplement for that. And so that goes along with your application. If you're going to consent parents and then assent children, and you're not going to be collecting both parents' signatures. You need a waiver for that, and there is a form for that. So there's.
But when you do the online application, or when you do fill out the application, it prompts you to do that
Yeah.
stuff. So you get a PDF to fill out, and it'll ask you, are you doing kids, and if you check that box, it'll pop up the forms you need, so you don't have to go hunting for them anymore.
You don't, although sometimes people still miss those, they can't find the right forms. There's also some great templates, which it seems like a lot of people miss, but they're fantastic. There's a standard consent form template. There's an assent template on the Human Subjects Division website. So there are kind of some ways to just get you started in terms of looking at how you develop those and what the necessary pieces are to use that form. And then you bring it to the Office of Research Support, which is me, Miller Hall, the 3rd floor, 300. And I go through just a general kind of review to make sure all the paperwork is there, if you have all the right copies, if you have the most current form, which again, like, will hopefully go away sooner rather than later, but the Human Subjects Division does make revisions to their applications and to their forms, and there's a small grace period window where you can still use those, but we've had a couple of instances where students have pulled down the application maybe when they started it a year ago, and then now they're ready to submit the application, and Human Subjects has done 3 revisions since then, and then they kick back the application saying you don't have the most current version. So kind of a general review of that. And then the dean's signature goes on all of our IRB applications, and it gets sent to the Human Subjects Division. Signatures on IRB applications. This one seems like it always kind of trips people up, but depending on where you are, how you're putting the application together, there is a document within Human Subjects Division, again, that describes all of the different formats, but you can digital, you can electronic, you can stamped, you can delegated. You don't have to have an original inked signature. But you do have to have the lead researcher signature, and for students, a few, your faculty sponsor, and then the chair, dean, or director, which most of the time is the dean here for the College of Education.
Or any of the associate deans.
Or any of the associate deans, that's for sure. But they can, like I said, you can email those and to your faculty advisor if your faculty advisor is, out of the building, or.
Can I just say something about faculty advisors?
Yeah.
Some faculty advisors who are really busy and have lots of trust of their graduate students, when you bring them one of these forms to sign, will go flip, flip, oh yeah, and sign it. Don't let them. Say, oh, Dr. So-and-so, would you please read through this? And you have to give them time to do it. Read through this and make sure that you don't see anything that's popping out. Because when they sign it, what they're really saying is, I've read this and it looks good and I'm signing it. And sometimes that happens, probably usually that happens, but sometimes it doesn't happen all that carefully. So I can say that I'm a faculty member, right? I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they can't do anything to me when I say this, but it's true. And so it will save you grief if you have, and it will actually save your faculty member grief too, if they only knew. If they will read through and make sure that they don't see anything that pops up. And Naomi will also read through it and see what she sees. But the more eyes on it, the more likely it is that it's going to be approved when it goes through and not have to go through 5 rounds of revision because people didn't have the right information or they didn't use the right form or whatever else.
And usually your faculty your advisor should be the closest to the kind of research you're doing. So if you're trying to think through an issue of ethics, they do that kind of research probably.
Right.
So they should be, it should not be
It's
the
not
case
an
where
imposition.
yeah.
It's their job.
Yeah.
It's not an imposition, it's their job.
And
So don't feel like you're asking them to do extra work. You're not. You're asking them to do their work, which is to read through your stuff. So what I tell my students is when they're putting IRBs through, IRB application through, I want to see it before anybody else sees it. So they do take your best shot at it with what you've got. Let me know if you have any questions about the process, but then fill it out and send it to me, and I want to go through it. So I make sure that they don't, but not everybody does that. Everybody's busy. So it's okay for you guys to ask for your advisor to do that.
yeah, and also as a resource here at the college, I'm happy to also, you know, go through applications or meet with people. I have some cards up here, but you know, frequently students will send me a draft version, and I can at least point them in the right direction, help them to kind of. I have some samples that I have in terms of other IRB applications or other assets, and how you can kind of write that language. There's some things that just are challenging to try to articulate, so sometimes it helps to have an example, and so I have some of those, and I'm always willing to share them. All right. Oh yeah, so the supplements and consents, just trying to call those out, the templates. The one thing that individual investigator agreements, it is the one form that requires an inked signature. And so that is, let's say you're working with a school and the teacher is going to be consenting to students. And so that teacher is now an investigator within your research proposal and needs to sign an individual investigator agreement that says that they're going to adhere to the same ethical principles and understand the responsibility of what they are charged to do within the research. And so they have accepted that, and that's an inked signature. And so those are some of those things too, where sometimes in time sensitivity we've done where they wanted to submit the IRB proposal right before the holiday break and didn't realize they need ink signature, and everybody's gone from school and they're not going to be back for 3 weeks. And how are we going to get the teacher to get the form and then sign it and then send it back? And that needs to go in with, ideally, with the IRB application.
Yeah, the only other thing that needs ink is when you're administering consent or assent to individuals.
Yes.
You need to sign it right then. You can't sign it ahead of time. If you're going to be doing, like, you're going to be handing out consent forms to go home to parents and you're handing them out to 30 people in class, then you can have, that can be photocopied with your signature on it. But if I sit down with Adrienne and I want to interview her and I'm going to consent her right now as an adult, I'm going to have, that's going to be blank on my consent form, and I'm going to print my name and write and sign it, and she's going to do that. And we're going to do that. Okay, so that's the only other place.
Yeah. The other data security, I just said this up here, but these are some things that definitely need to be thought about in terms of how you're collecting and how you're storing. We see this quite frequently. So just so you know, Dropbox, no, pretty much never. Your University of Washington Gmail account is actually FERPA protected, so you can upload data there, and you can have all sorts of data put up there. Obviously not HIPAA, but definitely FERPA. But that is only with your University of Washington Gmail account, so your personal Gmail account is not protected the same way that the University of Washington Gmail is, and that's because the University of Washington has an agreement with Google. So none of the data that's put into your UW Gmail gets mined. So it has less of a risk, and then we have an agreement with them. And I don't know, I don't see that many people using the Office 365 for that.
We do, and we also, there's one that's not on there that just came online, which is at the Center for Social Science,
Caesar.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Center for Social Science Statistics and Research, which is just over across the quad. They have a server that can handle things like big chunks of data, and also that has software that you would otherwise have to pay for that you can use on their server for free, like the qualitative data analysis software, Atlas TI, is on there to use for free. And you can get an account with them, and they are also FERPA compliant and HIPAA compliant.
And HIPAA compliant, yeah. So again, things that you know should come up in your application is we're going to be doing video and audio. How are you going to be storing that? How are you going to be sharing it? Where are you going to be putting it? How are you going to make sure that this is secure, that there's no, you know, if you have links and you've collected identified information and then you're, you know, de-identifying it, that those links aren't shared on the same, you know, laptop or thumb drive. So I kind of touched base on that, which was always go to the HSD website for the latest forms. Said that will change with Zipline. Records retention, so if you are unsure how long you need to keep stuff, there's guidelines for that in the UW Records Retention website. Human subjects will not accept incomplete applications, so it's another good reason to make sure that just had a student who submitted her IRB without coming through our office and did not have a complete application. And so Human Subjects Division sent it back to us and said, you know, this is incomplete. And so that will make your IRB process a lot longer. So you know, make sure that everything's complete and run it through our office first. I think you touched on the minimal risk determinations, but this was our recommendation. If we are from Bailey, we worked with her last year. So if you're unsure and your faculty advisor is unsure whether or not it's exempt or minimal risk, go for minimal risk. So fill out the minimal risk application because they can make an exempt determination from a minimal risk application. You cannot go the other direction. So if you're unsure and you submit an exempt and the IRB comes back and says, no, I think this is minimal risk, they're going to have you fill out that application and you're going to start the process again. So if it's, you can't quite figure out which category, go for the next one up. And yeah, there's on the handout too, there's also some other links to the website, but we have a website here in the Office of Research Support. Human Subjects Division has a website that is extremely helpful. Like I said, it's got a ton of forms, it's got a ton of checklists and templates and SOPs on how to do everything.
Yeah, the SOP on research involving
So our office was recently restructured. Like I said, we've grown over the past about 10 years or so, from 8 people in a basement who are like sitting among stacks of paper at this time to 40 people, which is appropriate. The University of Washington Human Subjects Division is one of the largest IRBs in the nation, which makes sense because the UW is one of the top recipients of federal funding in the nation. There's a lot of research. So our office, the review staff is broken up into 5 teams. Each of the teams is assigned to one of the full boards. So my team is Team G, and the College of Education here on the Seattle campus has been assigned to Team G. So almost all of the applications will come to my team. My team is made up of about 6 people, and you can see there's me. My job is to manage the team, manage the workload, do a few things like come out here on campus, work with our management team. I'm helping to develop policies, and I do also do about 50% of my time I do the individual reviews. We have 3 administrators, and these are the people who, when your brand new application, when your study comes in, these will be the people who will take a look at it and figure out, can I review this myself, or do I need to send this to a board? They're the ones who are going to be doing that. And we do have 2 review coordinators, and they deal with applications that have already been approved, and some to say somebody needs to make a change, or somebody wants to send in the status report, like Sue mentioned, that once your approval is over, we need to see another status report to review your approval. Who to contact? I'm more than happy to answer questions that you might have. That's about 50% of my job is miscellaneous, which involves answering questions. I am happy to talk via phone. I'm happy to talk via email. I try and be as responsive as possible, but do know my committee is also assigned to other big groups like psychiatry and behavioral sciences. We see a lot from the College of Arts and Sciences, especially psychology. So we are balancing workload among lots of teams. But we do try to be as responsive as possible. You're welcome to contact me. You're also welcome to contact any of the 3 administrators, Nina, Marcia, and Deborah, who are all very experienced and have seen research from lots of different places. You can contact them if you're trying to build a new application and you're not quite sure what's the best way to go or what information might be needed. If you have an active application and it's a minimal risk application, you're welcome to contact Gemma or Rachel. They handle changes that you might want to make to your research or a status report that you might have to send in. Any questions about that?